Welcome to another exciting input, and today's input is on testing. As teachers, we do a lot of testing. We test our learners, or if we're very good, they test each other. But one of the questions we want to look at today is why do we do it? So what are the benefits? Mainly, there are some disadvantages as well, I'm sure, but what are the benefits in testing? What are the key components of testing? So what are we actually testing? We also want to look at the different types of tests because there are many. And I'm not talking about different kinds of exams, I'm talking about different kinds of tests. That's very useful for us to increase our awareness of as teachers. We then want to look at some good sites that we can use either for placement testing or to help us design our own tests. And then we will ask ourselves and hopefully discover how we go about using them. And then, of course, at the end of this, there will be a test. You will be tested. You will be tested many times in your life. And for most of us, if we're lucky, we will be motivated by that test. If we want to get a driver's license, then we are motivated to practice. If we want to do an exam, then we are motivated to learn more. If we want to be a surgeon or a builder or an athlete or any such thing, we will be tested, and that testing motivates us to achieve more. We tend to focus more. Yeah, we tend to concentrate more on what we need to achieve. We tend to memorize more. We tend to organize our time better so that we can achieve something. So when we have someone in a learning environment, a test is a very good way to motivate them to learn more. We use tests to measure level. Now, of course, that measure of level is very important to parents, employers, and academic institutions, but that measure of level is also very important for us. We like to know what we can do. Yeah, we like to know how high we can jump. We like to know how well we can read. Yeah, we like to have some sort of independent measure of what it is we can do. So testing can be used to measure level, and also at the same time, as teachers, we have to test. We don't have a choice in that. We have to test. Parents expect us to test their children because if we don't test them, parents will not know what they have learned. Of course, employers need tests because they need an independent measure that they can look at and go, aha, I know what that test is about. I know what that result means. And similarly, academic institutions are very interested in the results of tests because that means that they know that they can enroll you in a course for which you will be tested. And of course, a course that you will do well in. We use tests to demonstrate progress, and we need that. Doesn't matter who we are, we need demonstrations that we have learned something, that we have achieved something. Often the case in language learning, for example, that people really have no idea how much they've learned. And unless you're testing your learners on a regular basis, and whether that's young or adult, without some measure of their progress, they will tend to lose motivation. When we do test, we get a sense of achievement. You do a test and you pass, you think, whoa, I am good. Yeah. If you're a kid and you do a test and you get a gold star, you think, whoa, I'm good. We all do, actually. I mean, go to one of your fellow teachers and say, I think you did a really good job. Here's a gold star. They will go, oh, wow, thank you. Because that sense of achievement in having done something, having achieved something, is something that really, really motivates us. Of course, If you're a teacher and you've got an exam at the end of the year, you must have lots of little tests so that your learners learn what the test is about, learn what kinds of questions there are in the test, get to measure their own level, get to set new goals that they want to achieve as learners. So there's lots of good reasons why we test. And of course, one of the very good reasons is that testing and achievement is a fundamental part of being human. Let's start by looking at some of the key concepts in testing. So when we test, probably our primary or at least initial concern is how practical it all is. Now you know that we can spend a long time designing a test, or we can spend a relatively short amount of time. One is not better than the other, we know that. But let's take, for example, an essay. And we decide that we know more or less what the students have been studying. We know more or less what the syllabus is. And we think, okay, I'm going to set them an essay. And the essay is write about what you did on your holiday, for example, or write about cleanliness in the school. And you think, good. Then you've got to sit there and watch for an hour while they write it. Now, that's okay. Maybe you have other things to do while you're sitting there checking on what they're doing, but you would have to ask yourself, is that the best use of class time? Is it a really good measure of what you want them to achieve? So in terms of practicality, you can consider how much time you take to make it. You need to consider how much time it takes your students to do it. And then of course, the big question, how much time it takes to mark it. So going with an essay for the moment, when you receive that essay from your students, what are you marking? Are you marking the way they address the question? So how focused their answer is on the question? Are you marking the structure throughout the essay? Are you marking the structure within paragraphs? Are you marking the cohesive devices? Are you marking the grammar? Are you marking the lexis? Are you marking the content? What exactly are you marking when you mark that essay? Essay marking is a big skill, and it can take a lot of time to go through and mark an essay, especially if you want it to be a useful result for your learners. Because if someone writes an essay and you mark it and cross a few things out, what have they learned about their mistakes? What have they learned in terms of how they can improve? Sometimes not a lot. So when we are designing a test, we have to consider first matters of practicality. We could look at, for example, a short answer test. Now in a short answer test, the questions are going to take longer to design, and then the answers will be a little bit hard to mark, because in a short answer you also have to ask yourself, what are you marking? Are you marking the meaning in the answer, or are you marking the spelling, or are you marking the grammar? What exactly are you marking? Because in short answer tests, there's always potential for confusion about what the learner is actually saying. You could, for example, do as we have done, which is give you multi-choice tests. Multi-choice tests take a little bit longer to design. And once they're designed, of course, there's one answer. So relatively easy to mark. You have tick, cross, tick, cross, tick, cross. Fine. But in terms of a test from which your learners can learn, maybe not so good, unless you do what we have done, which is in the tests that you do on this course, but not in the final exam. In the test that you do, you will do it, then you will find out the right answer, then you will read a detailed explanation for why the answer is right. So in that kind of testing, the marking is relatively straightforward because you've done it already. You might consider other such things as gap fills. Now, gap fills are good because they create context. The unfortunate part of gap fills is that if you make a mistake in one gap, then you can make a mistake in other gaps simply because you have made one mistake. And of course, in gaps, it's harder to mark because there is usually more than one possibility. So when it comes to designing your test, the first thing you want to consider is how practical is it? How easy is it to make? How easy is it to mark? And of course, how much time will it take to mark it? And if it's something like an essay or a test in classroom, how easy is it to administer it? We have a test for our learners. One of the questions we want to ask ourselves is, how valid is it? So for example, we think, I'm going to give my learners a speaking test. And I know that there are many different things I can mark on. I could mark on their ability to answer my questions, how long it takes them to think of the answer, how fluent the answer is, and so on. Or, no, better, I give them a speech test. So their job is to prepare and deliver a speech. We would have to ask ourselves, is that a valid measure of speaking skills? In real life, sure, we give speeches, but in reality, those speeches are prepared, rehearsed, and then delivered. They're not a measure of what we can do naturally and normally in our language use. So it would be fair to say that while a speech is something that's easy to set, and not so hard to mark, it's not a valid measure of speaking skills. We might also look at, for example, a vocabulary test, and we go, okay, so what I will do is I'll put the word here, and then the learners can choose in a multi-choice which definition is the best. And they do that, takes a little bit of time to write, but yeah, we can get a result at the end. That's fine. But does that in any way measure a learner's ability to use vocabulary? Does it measure their ability to use lexical chunks? Does it measure the flexibility in their vocabulary? And the answer is probably no. That a vocabulary multi-choice test is not a valid measure of vocabulary. Other thing we might want to consider is the backwash effect of a particular test. So if, for example, we have tests at the end of the year, and all of those tests are perhaps grammar tests, vocabulary tests, reading tests, and writing tests, but none of them are speaking tests. This will mean that the backwash effect is our students will not study speaking. It will also mean that as teachers, we will not value speaking as a skill. And you can see many other examples of that. So in IELTS, for example, in which in the writing component, there is a focus on writing on graphs or charts, that students who are studying for that spend a lot of time preparing essays on writing on bar charts, graphs, pie charts, etc., etc. But they ignore a vast number of other really important writing skills. When we design a test or we give our students a test, we feel we need to rely on the result, and many other people feel that they should be able to rely on the result. But if our questions are unclear or our instructions are unclear, then the person who's marking it will have difficulty because they don't really know what they are marking for. For example, if I, as a teacher, I give an essay to my students and it is write an essay about a holiday. We might think, yeah, that's okay. That's not too bad. But then the question arises, is this about a holiday you had, or a holiday you've planned to have, or a holiday you want to have, or something else? Because the instructions and the questions are not clear, we would be marking quite different essays from different students, and it would be very hard to rely on the result as a measure of how well those students wrote. We would also note that in that write an essay about a holiday, that there's no indication of how long it should be or a whole number of other details that would mean that we could rely on it because the question and the instructions were clear. Let me give you another example. Imagine there is an exam and it's a grammar exam and there's a sentence and the instructions are identify the subject, verb, object, adverbial and complement in the sentence, and that's it. Yeah, you might think, that's okay. But if, for example, the student doing that doesn't underline those components and doesn't write what they are above them, then you as the marker wouldn't know if in fact they just guessed or if they knew where all those components were. So when we are looking for a reliable test, we need to make sure that our instructions are clear, that our questions are clear. And when we do that, then hopefully different people looking at that exam or looking at that test will reach the same result about what has been done. So that's pretty critical. One small problem that is the case in testing, especially with multi-choice, is that students develop or have learned all sorts of techniques for guessing the answer. Or in any part of an exam, they might just guess the answer and get lucky. We can't really stop them doing that, but we should try and minimize the opportunities for students to guess. Tricky, but worth attending to. So in the end, imagine that someone has done the test and then you mark the answer. At some point, in order for the result to be reliable, the result has to be in relation to how you have marked the test. And as we've mentioned already about the essay, how are you marking it? What weighting are you giving to, for example, the meaning? What weighting are you giving to the grammar, the lexis, and so on? So that's the next key component of testing that we want to look at, and that is if you are designing a test, make sure it's a reliable one. Placement tests are one of the key measures that we use if we want a class to work well. I know that in big schools or schools with large classes, this is a bit difficult, but we do know that if a learner is in the right class at the right level, well, then their capacity to learn goes up because they're learning within a knowledge set that they have got already. They know the fundamentals at that level and they can improve. If they're in the wrong class, perhaps they're at a higher level, then it's difficult for them to make the jump in terms of knowledge from low level to high level when they miss the scaffolding in between. If they're in the wrong class as in a lower level, then they tend to lose motivation because the drive to learn is not there. So placement tests are an important part of your technique set as a teacher, and that is to give your kids placement tests before they start a class. Now, we will look at a very good language placement test later in this input, but enough for now. The other thing that we want to consider is the progress test. And this is something that you will do throughout the year. So you will have taught something, and then you will test your learners on what they have achieved in relation to what you have taught them. And this is a very good measure for them and for you about the effect of the teaching and the effect on the learning. And then, of course, if the progress test shows to you that progress in particular areas has not been very strong, or then of course you go ahead and do some remedial teaching. Imagine you are feeling really rich and you decide that you want to employ a cook. Yes? You can go, how do I know if that person is a good cook? You could, for example, say to them, okay, please make me fried rice. Yeah? And you know that everyone who is even a cousin of a cook can make a fried rice, and they make you a fried rice. Yeah? This will not tell you if this particular person is a good cook. Will not tell you. If you really wanted to know if that person was a good cook, you might say to them, okay, come to my house tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and then I will give you something to cook. So they come next day at 3 o'clock, and you say, there's the kitchen. You have 3 hours. Okay, cook me something. In that, they don't know what's in your refrigerator. They don't know what's in your cupboard, but they use their skills, they use their knowledge, they use their proficiency to produce a good meal. Now that's the difference between a proficiency test and perhaps a discrete item test or a part of a syllabus test. So you could be testing parts of speech. Yeah, you could be testing communicative fluency with the functions of offers, for example. Or you could be testing a much bigger notion of what language competence is. So ideally, that's where we want to move, is towards proficiency. And there are a few exams that suggest that they get close to measuring proficiency. I'm not completely sure that they do, but exams that meet C2, so we're talking perhaps IELTS 9 or GCSE 12, those could be close to what we could regard as a proficiency test. But let's go back a little bit. In the course of our teaching, at the end of a year, we have a summative test, which is our students do a test and we give them a grade. And that's it. A summative test is a measure of what they have learned in relation to what you think they should have learned. Standard. Very standard, very traditional, and an important measure. We've mentioned that already. Or we can go for a more contemporary and possibly more valuable piece of learning, which is in a formative assessment. Now, in a formative assessment, you test your learners because you want them to know and you want you to know what they're good at and what they can improve on. So you give them a test, and then with them, you work through the result. So what did they do well? Yeah, what can they do better at? What are they going to do to get better at? So that sort of formative assessment is much more productive in terms of improving learners' language competence. We do placement tests to make our lives easier. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. If we are in a very large school with large numbers of kids, placement testing can be quite a challenge. But if we're in smaller schools with smaller numbers of kids, then it's a little bit less of a challenge. We know that as teachers, if we have kids of different levels in the same classroom, our classroom management becomes very difficult, because some of those kids will be interested and achieving. Some of them will be bored because they know it already, and some of them will be lost because they have no idea what's going on. So in terms of placement testing, we do it so that kids go into the right class. And of course, when we get them in the right class, then their ability to learn goes up. We can, of course, having kids in the right class, have a good awareness of what it is they can learn. So we teach according to where they are in their developmental syllabus, if you like. When we do that, we engage their motivation. And when they're motivated, we tend to get success. If kids are in the wrong class because they haven't been given a placement test, and it's very, very common for schools not to do placement tests or to do a very short 5-minute one or some such. But if we don't give kids a placement test and put them in the right class, what you do get as an outcome is challenges in terms of success or failure. Those kids who are in the wrong class will feel like they are failing, even though they're not failing, they're just in the wrong class. The first thing that we're going to look at is how you can assess your learners' phonics competence. The suggestion I would make here is that you obviously can use the material that's on the site, and you can adapt it if you wish, but I would recommend that in terms of assessing phonics, you probably want to go with some fairly standardized and very, very good tests. So in just a moment, we will go to visiting the site and walk through the process and let you have a look at what material is available. Okay, so what we have here is the Phonics Hero website, something that should be very useful for you as a teacher. One of the first things we're going to look at is extra resources here in the panel on the left, and within that, levels of learning. We want to go to levels of learning so we've got an understanding of what those different levels are. You'll see part 1, basic code, which deals with pretty much all the phonics sounds that young learners need to master. Then you will see the advanced code, and finally the completed code. This represents for you not only a good sequence but also a good syllabus. But let's look at the assessment tools that you want to use. So there are some clear, simple and basic ones that you can use in your classroom for identifying things like letter sound correspondence knowledge, blending of sounds, etc. So you can use these tests to find out what your learners know or need to know more about. You can also use the Excel tracker to record the results. You will want access to the assessment tools for teachers, fill out the required school, etc. here, and then go to your teacher account. What you will find in your teacher account, and quite surprisingly, is a number of very good assessment tools that are available for you free. You will also find a whole number of worksheets that are available for you free, and 850 online games that you can use online or in your classroom on an interactive whiteboard. Needless to say, not all of this is free. There are needs for you at various points to buy some things, but overall, in terms of assessing your learners' skills, identifying their needs, and testing their phonics, this is a very good site. So this is where we want to be on a website which is going to test our English. And here we are. The first decision we've got to make is which of these tests we're going to use. I know general English for schools, business and young learners, they look quite similar, but they are all designed for a particular purpose. So these are not proficiency tests. These are tests that are going to test the language competence that is required in a particular area. So the general English option will be testing for language competence that is related to normal everyday life, possibly travel and so on. The for schools option is going to look at the syllabus that you tend to find in schools. So attention to grammar, attention to lexis, attention to functions that are normally taught. Within business English, we're looking at fairly complex language, and that is the language that is used in business exchange, in the office, in emails, and so on. The one that we are going to use is the test for young learners, mainly because I think I can pass it. Just kidding. I don't think I can. And we'll click now on begin that test so we get an idea of what that test is like. So first off, let's look at the options. The first one is a pretty standard picture plus Lexis match, and I'm going to get the first one right so I can feel good. Then I'm going to look at the second one. I'm going to get it wrong because I just want to have a total score that's different from what I might get. My getting a good mark for this doesn't help us as teachers. So I'll have a look at this one. I'll get that one correct. It is a rainy day, and go to the next. In the next part of this test, we're looking at a discourse test, if you like. So we've got a question and an answer, and I'm going to choose a correct one just because I feel like it. But for all the others, I'm just going to choose anything like so, and then move to the next part of the test. This part of the test is, of course, a classic, which is a context and then language within that context. Pretty common as a test type and potentially very good, but also has its own number of pitfalls. So within this, I'm just going to choose any one of these, anywhere. Bear in mind that there are more options than the ones I'm showing you, but I'll put all those there. So that's done. Go to next. And then when I'm happily at next, I need to turn off the audio through these, otherwise we'll get a confusing collection of sounds as we go through. So in all of these, what will happen is, of course, that you listen to the audio and then choose a picture. So I'm going to choose that one, I'm going to choose that one just for fun, and that one, and that one, and 3:45 because it's my favorite time. Then what we want to see as teachers is the result. Now you will notice when the result appears that we'll get a score. So I got 8 out of 15. This can be useful for you if you're comparing competence within your group of learners. You can also, and we're not going to do it now, you can go through and review the answers. I would suggest that you probably don't let your students do that, because if you wish to use the test again at a later date, then there will be some negative effect of the review. But what you do want to know is what the level is. And the level is described as A1 movers. We can ignore movers, but we do want to recognize A1. So let's just click on A1 movers so we get an indication of what that means. So if you want, go here, you can
click on the CEFR level, which is the Common European Framework of References level, and that will describe to you in detail what an A1 looks like. Very useful for you as a teacher, and that will help you diagnose your learners and look at how you can adjust their teaching to meet their needs. So that's that for this website, which is all about testing your English, and I think it is really one of the best ones out there. Okay, so here we are on the Khan Academy site, a very, very good site. You will have to, of course, sign up, but you don't have to donate, though that is a very good idea because the site is a non-profit one and it has a lovely mission to make education more freely available. So on this, let's take a look at the courses that are available and what benefits you can get from them. Clearly, the math courses are ones that you would probably want to share with your colleagues. Arts and humanities, some of those will be very useful for you. The grammar here is largely for teachers, and storytelling, always something good to be skilled at, and then test prep. So let's take a look at SAT, which could be useful for you or could be useful for some of your students. Within that, we want to take a look at what we need to know, which is what are the skill levels. So let's take a look at reading and writing. We're not going to do these, but you can use this test to figure out your diagnostics. So what you're good at, what you're not so good at, what you need to improve on. And then, of course, a vast array of practice options. So great stuff there. But let's go back, if you like, to here, to the beginning, and we'll take a look at early math. Because what I would like to do is just identify for you some of the process here. So each one of these sections here will give your learners something to do, something they can do on their own or in class. But as they do it, if the competence is low, then the test will get easier in order to identify what the learner needs to improve on. If you're strong, then it will get harder to see more precisely what it is you need to learn. So you can work all your way through there. So math teachers will have a good idea of what this means. Then, of course, you get to the end, and in the end, you do a test to test your knowledge of skills that you've learned in the course. So yet again, another useful diagnostic. So this is a very good site. I strongly recommend that you visit it, sign up and start learning. I'm sure you won't be the least bit surprised to see TestMoz here. Now, the reason that we use TestMoz is it's really simple in terms of its clarity. It's very easy for websites to be complex and hard for busy teachers to navigate. And this is why we chose this one. I'd like to point out that I get no financial benefit from telling you that. It's just the way it is. It's good. So it is very simple. You adjust a few things, add your questions, and distribute the URL. It's as simple as that. When the results are in, you get this full, simple display here, names, score, started, finish time, and then the actual result per question type. So who uses it? Teachers, obviously, trainers, employers, and many more, but we won't do it just now. But when you do get on the site and look around, you can see here that there's pretty much everything you could possibly want in a test that's available on this site. But let's take a look at how you do it. So there we are. You've seen this one before, the Certificate in International TESOL Techniques, Part A, and it's done already, but I'm just going to show you what happens when you set up a test. The first thing you do is adjust your settings, so you name it, fairly straightforward. If you want to give it an introduction, you do that there. You can determine how all the questions are shown, which is a really good idea. And when someone finishes the test, they get a nice message. You can choose any of these if you wish. I like to display the explanation because I think that's a very important part of learning. Who can take the test, so you can give a passcode or you can make it anyone. Up to you. I like to make things like this unlimited amount of time because it's not about speed, it's about learning. But a certain limit on the number of times you can take it, so you focus a little bit on achieving it. You can choose any one of these. I turn them off for reasons of my own. And then, of course, if you want the results sent to you, enter your email address there, or you can set up your own accounts on it. Okay, so let's go back now to the questions. And in this, we're going to look at just the first question. I don't want to go through all the questions and give away too many answers, but let's just click on this first one here. So it's easy to add a question or edit it. So let me just go la 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 la, which is wrong, and reduce that. Good, very easy to edit. Add your options here. And then what I really like to do, which is give good, clear explanation for why the answer is correct. Now, obviously, the point in that is not so much testing you, but reminding you what you need to know. So you can use all sorts of question types, but I've used multi-choice. And I think if you look at the input earlier on testing, you will know why we've done that. So when it's done, you publish it. Very simple. The publishing produces a URL here, and you share that URL with your learners. Then, of course, you get the results, which you have seen already. So very simple website, very simple piece of software, also available on phones. Very straightforward for you to set tests and analyze in detail what it is your learners know and don't know. I thought it would be really nice to include this site, not so much because it's about testing, because it's not, but because it's about making really good use of current or relevant video to engage your learners. Something that you can get them working on outside normal class hours. So there are lessons available or series that you can use. What I've done for us today is I've created a little lesson just to show you what that looks like. On this, students can also prepare talks, or you can organize your own educator talks. So let's start by trying to create a lesson, and just for fun we'll just put in football to see what we get for that. And in football we discover, aha, looks interesting, fast referees. Okay, we've got that. We're going to continue because we're teachers and we want to make something interesting for our learners. Now, I'm not going to input these questions here because we've got another example later, but you'll see very clearly it comes up. You add the questions, like, for example, introduce your lesson in a few sentences and so on. And then you've got something that you can work with for your learners. But we're going to flick back to a lesson that we've got already, and hopefully, and that's a lesson that we have here, a lesson that we can enjoy. Yeah, so it's brilliant ways people have responded to the coronavirus outbreak. So created by me, and this is it. So your learners can watch the video. They get to think about it. And what are they going to think? They're thinking about how being positive and caring is the best thing to do. And they're going to watch the video and answer the question, how do you think their responses could be better? They write an answer and save it. We go digging deeper. So next question is, are responses different because of different cultures? They write an answer, they post it for you. Then you can have a discussion that will evolve from the group. And finally, you have a little takeout. So what message would you give to people about how to respond to coronavirus? So deceptively simple site, really good material, very easy for you to generate lessons around it, and very easy for you to share.
Our roles as teachers change, they evolve as the world changes. The world now doubles its knowledge every 18 months. Every 18 months. So there's an extraordinary amount of new information out there every day. And our job as teachers has changed. Our job is no longer to test and fail, or to test in order to drive our learners to achieve things. Our job is to test to enable, to test to form that learning so our learners can achieve more as learners. I hope that the sites and the definitions that we've looked through today in this video, I hope they're really useful to you as a teacher, and I hope they help you continue in your growth.